Hello ladies and gentlemen, today I'm going to add an armature to this tree here, my low polygon tree. I'm going to try to speed up the video so that while I'm putting all the bones in, it doesn't take a long time for you to watch this. Because that's a tedious procedure when I've got all of these branches that I've extruded out of my geometry. So, a very important idea at the start, make sure that your geometry is seated at 0, 0, 0 in the world. It's going to help a lot when we're starting to put the first bone in. And that our scales are set to 1, 1, 1. So if you have scaled up your geometry, you can just tap Command A, and then you can apply all transformations and just make sure that it's sitting at 0, 0, 0. And that your base is seated on the floor. That's going to be important when we try to bring this into Unreal. All right, so I'm just going to go over to my side view here, and I'm going to switch on over to wireframe mode. It's a lot easier to do this in wireframe. I'm going to show you some power tips as well. There's a few different ways that we can look at bones. First things first, I want to get this 3D cursor. I'm just shift right clicking to show you that that's what this object is here, and we can see it's moving around when I tap the N key and look at the view on the bottom tab, that it's moving around. I need that to get to 0, 0, 0. Quick key to get that to snap down to the bottom is Shift C, which is really nice. It centers it out and centers out your view as well. Shift A, and we need to be in object mode. Watch up top here in the left. We have to be in object mode. We can't be in edit mode to do this. We're creating a new object, so Shift A, and we're going to add an armature. I've already scaled my tree to be quite tall, so the first bone that gets introduced here looks a little bit small. Now this is going to anchor my tree to the ground, and if you think about a tree, it doesn't really bend until we get up until the higher part of the tree where the first set of branches might be. So I can scale this right now, but I'm applying a transformation to it, similar to the problems that we have when we scale our objects. I could tap the S key and just scale this up right now, or I could choose to do this in edit mode. So I'm going to hop right into edit mode right away, and instead of scaling, zooming up here, I'm just going to grab the top of the bone, I'm going to select it, and I'm going to tap G for move, and I'm going to move it on Z and move it right up to the first branch. I don't want the bottom to move at all. It's a nice thick piece of wood, so let's leave it standing still, and then the stuff at the top can start to move around. Now, interesting fact about Blender. On the right-hand side over here, you can see there's a little running man, and that's our object data properties for this bone. We can change the way these bones look. We can see them as octahedral, which is the default, but you can actually change them to be sticks. These things called B-bones, or envelopes, or wires, which is really handy. I'm going to actually work in B-bone mode because it's the only style of bone that can actually be scaled. I mean, the stick that holds the joints together, and I have to hold down Control, Option, and S, and then I can actually scale my bones, which is great. So by default, I think they're about this thick, but you can scale that down with Control, Option. You got to press them both at the same time and make it a nice little stick like so. Now I'm going to orbit around my viewport and just make sure that that first joint is exactly where I need it to be, that it's in the center of my geometry. That's the nice thing about centering your object off to the world when you start, and then extrude that first joint up on the Z axis. Now the rest of this is a very mechanical process. So I'm gonna go through the first one. Oh, let's just go up to the top. So I'm gonna highlight the joint. I'm gonna click on that and select it. And then I'm going to extrude with E and tap the Z key to make sure I'm extruding on the right axis. I'm gonna try my best to stay inside of the geometry. Now I want to have one of these joints on each of the branch arms. So I notice up top here, I did two extrusions, one on top of the other. So I'm going to also extrude on Z to about there, extrude on Z to about here. I'm going to go all the way to the top. And then G on Z to move it up to the tip top. Doesn't have to be perfect. And then orbit around, tap G, and then try to slide that, move that into the right position. Yeah, that's pretty good. Same thing with the ones we just created. So that one's a little bit high, so I'm going to G. I don't have to be perfect. I'm going to try to get that centered. And then coming back down the stalk at each one of my joints, I'm going to tap the E key and extrude it out like so. I need to orbit around. While I've got that highlighted, I'm going to try my best to position that inside the geometry. That looks pretty good. Extrude. You'll see right now I'll make a mistake. It'll be way, way off to the left. So orbiting around, trying to get that into the center of the geometry is what we want. This joint here, G on Z, extrude. I'm just going to draw this as best as I can. Extrude and extrude like so. Now, seeing it only from one angle, I'm going to have to look around and go, oh, that's way outside of my geometry. So grab each joint, G for move, try to get it inside the mesh. And I think at this point, I'm going to give myself a visual cue in the video, a thumbs up. Now I'm going to speed up the video. I think I'm satisfied with what I've got here in terms of a skeleton inside. You'll notice there are moments, for example, like this bone here, where I'm not being overzealous with the number of bones that I put inside of this branch, because I'm just going to have that whole set of vertices out there sway. Now, from a technical perspective, what we're going to do now is assign all of the vertices that's in our geometry to each of the bones. So we're going to create what are called vertex groups, groupings and clusters of vertices that are then related to specific bones, so that when we move that one bone, they're only going to move the specific vertices. Now, if we have a good skeleton inside of our mesh, Blender does a pretty darn good job of auto assigning weights. And the way we do that, we hop back to object mode and we highlight our skeleton, our armature. Then we highlight the geometry, shift click, so we select both. Right click, parent, and parent with automatic weights. Now, weights relate to how much influence a bone has over certain vertices. And there is a view, and we can hop on over into weight paint mode, and we can take a look at our geometry, and we can see what is influenced by what. Now, let's triple check to even make sure that this is working at all. So I'm gonna grab my, I should be seeing over here, this might have been a mistake. I'm looking down here at my vertex groups, that's the green little triangle. I grab my tree and then my armature, right click, parent with automatic weights. Loop in parents. I should see in the vertex groups list here a whole bunch of vertex groups, but something's not working. Now this is the second time I've worked on this geometry, so maybe the fact that I've already assigned vertex groups, this is part of the process. We got to debug this. So if I go into pose mode and I pose any one of my bones, because there's no vertex groups, this should not move. I'm going to tap the R key to rotate. Yeah, that's not associated to that at all. So a little power tip. If you've rotated something and you want to put it back into its original position, look under the pose menu, you can clear the transform all, and that'll put it back to where it originally was. Okay, so I need to figure this out. Object mode, U, my armature, shift, click on U. I know that the command is Command P, parent, set parent, vertex, no, U, shift and U, parent, with automatic weights. Loop in parents. Maybe I need to clear the parents. Clear parents like so. Clearing the parent, maybe that'll repair it. Bear with me, my friends. There we go. That's what I need to see. So I had to first, because I had messed around with this geometry before, I had forgotten to clear the parents. So I got rid of all of the relationships between the previous armature that I had deleted. I thought by just deleting the armature, it would have cleared that relationship and cleared the parents, but obviously it did not. So I just simply had to highlight my geometry, right click, and clear parents. So if you're having that problem, that's the way to fix it. So now I can see that in my vertex groups, and where I'm pointing with my cursor, the little green triangle, I can see all of my bones. And it's kind of nice because if I highlight my vertex groups in here, there's lots of work we can do with them, including if I go over onto weight paint mode, I can click down my list and I can see what the different bones are actually influencing in my geometry, which is really, really great. It's great. So bone 1, that's the one way down here on the ground. Now, if you look at the next move I'm going to do, I'm going to pop into wireframe mode. And I'm going to turn off weight paint. I'm going to go into object mode. I'm going to select my base bone down here in pose mode. Yeah, there's lots of hopping in and out of modes. And I may as well just test to see what Blender's done. What's going to happen, for example, if I rotate this bone for animation now? If I tap the R key, that's pretty good. It's leaving the trunk of the tree well enough alone, but it doesn't have a lot of influence on the geometry over here. It's tugging these vertices around. So I wonder if I pose this, clear that pose, all, and I now need to go to object mode. Kind of back and forth with your modes, got to get used to that. So I highlight my armature and shift click on my geometry, and now I can go into weight paint mode. Now it's kind of frustrating. It's like, oh, the bones are kind of hidden inside of the geometry. That's not fun. I wish they were more accessible. Well, there's a way to deal with that. Highlight my armature, and I'm going to look at the viewport display in pose mode, and one of the options, it's the same way that we had changed this from the default bones to be the B bones. We got to find those. There it is. So it's under the actual little running man, the object data properties for the actual armature, where it says B bone. We have a checkbox down here where we can say B in front. So now it's going to put the armature visibly on top of the geometry. So we go back to object mode, highlight the armature, highlight the geometry, and then go into weight paint. Cool. Now I can actually see my bones inside. There we go. I'm just going to switch from wireframe over to solid shading, and now I can see my bones. It's kind of tricky because it is a weird illusion, because you're seeing these things on top, so be careful and always be orbiting around to see what's going on here. Yeah. And now, this is tricky. You can select each of the bones and fix up what it is that the bones are influencing. You can paint the geometry to get rid of vertices that are being affected by a bone. To do that, you have to press Control, and you can't just click anywhere on the bone. It has to be on the tail of the bone. It's kind of tricky. And you go all the way up to the joint. It's not working for me. Trying to highlight the bone itself. I'm in weight paint mode and I'm weight painting away. I can see my dark blue is turning to dark blue. And I currently have this bone selected. Weight paint. Let's triple check something here. Highlight. You got to make sure the two are selected for this to work. Highlight the bone. Highlight the armature, and then shift highlight the geometry. I'm going to turn off X-ray mode. I don't need it. Select the armature, select the geometry, and then switch on over to weight paint. Now in theory, hold down Control, you should be allowed to click on all of the individual bones. You have to hold down Control and then click on the bones. Oh, they did fix it, so you can click anywhere on the bone. That's kind of new in this version of Blender. Yay. So I can see, if I click on this guy up here, Control, click on that top bone, that there is some cyan on this branch here. And you have to think of it as a gradient from cold blue, meaning it's got no influence, to red, which has all of the influence. So anything that's red is going to move a lot, and then as we go through this gradient down to this navy blue, that is going to fade off the influence. So we don't want this branch over here to be affected at all. So having these things on top are actually a little bit frustrating. So I'm going to go back to object mode, highlight my armature, and I'm going to turn off in front. That might be useful when you're creating them, but I'm going to turn that off for now. Hop on over to wireframe mode, highlight my armature, and then shift, highlight my geometry, and switch over to weight paint mode. Nice. I wish I could see. What if I go to X-ray mode? That's okay. Yeah, I'm gonna turn on X-ray up here so I can actually see. Yeah, that's good. So they're not on top, but I can see the bones, so I can control and click on them and move through the entire armature. Now this is advanced stuff compared to what we were doing in class. Not advanced compared to what you do in reality. This is the tip of the iceberg. So it's a brush that you have on by default when you're painting weights. 0 would mean 0 influence, which will paint navy blue onto the geometry. And then the strength of the tool. So you got to make sure you set that, first pass, just turn that all the way up to 1. And I'm going to make this so that it paints blue on my shape because I only want that top bone to really affect the geometry at the top. So I'm just going to start to paint. And this is it. This is what we do. So I'm going to come on down. If you press the F key, you can change the size of your brush. So F, and then drag your mouse, scale it up and down, and just la la la. This is what we do. And I'm painting this navy blue all over the tree below the bone I currently have highlighted, because I don't want this bone to transform or deform the mesh over here. So it can be a little bit janky, I won't lie. Sometimes you got to zoom in and paint a little bit closer to the screen like so, and you can see the cyan is sticking around. And it's not always perfect. Change your brush size. Be careful not to paint over here. Shrink it down. See if I can't get a more accurate paint on that. Yeah, that's working great now. Yeah, and this is how we do. This is how we do it. Yeah. Paint, paint, paint. Now, in theory, this bone should be only affecting change on this one vertex group that I currently have selected, which is bone group 4. I'll paint a little bit more. If you have a complex set of bones, an armature like this, yeah, you got to go through each one of your bones and paint roughly what it is you would like to have influenced. For now, let's go back to object mode. I'm going to switch over to shaded view. I'm going to go into pose mode. See if I can't grab my armature here. Hit into pose mode. And I'm going to see whether or not that bone is now truly only influencing the top of the tree, which is R. Yeah. Oh, I can see there's a little bit of something wiggling on this branch over here. So that tells me there's a little bit of work to do. So pose, clear transform all, set it back up, and get back into weight paint mode. Object mode, select my armature, shift on the geometry, get into weight paint mode. If you want, you can go to the eyeball and you can hide your armature. I mean, it's still selected. Don't think it's not. It's still selected. We're still working on the right stuff. I just wanted it to get out of the way for a minute. This is where somebody on YouTube is going to chime in and go, hey buddy, you could just do that. because I need to get rid of all of that cyan. There's some really great tools over here, like the smear tool. That fixed it for me. Look at that. The smear tool just smeared that navy blue, we'll call it. It's actually the value 0 influence. And I don't know, I find this stuff really zen and relaxing. I just take a look at that. It looks great. You know, nice gradient from the top down to where I know the joint is. I'm going to show my armature again, and then I'm going to rotate that in pose mode. I wish there was a quick way to just jump to pose mode instead of having to go to object mode. Maybe there is. There's so much to learn. So rotate. There we go. That's doing what I want. That's doing exactly what I want. Move around the surface. Look around the viewport just to make sure there isn't something else janky happening. Awesome. Super cool. While I'm in pose mode, I'm just going to come down and test the next bone just to see how it's doing. I think that got set up just fine. This one up here, that needs a whole lot of love. That needs a lot of love. So I'm just going to, if you want, you can tap the A key and select all, pose, clear, transform all. That will just reset all of your rotations and positions of your bones. And this was the bone in question here. Got to go back to object mode, armature, shift click on the geometry, go to weight paint mode, control click on the bone you want to work on. And it was that one here that was giving me grief. And then I can start to paint out with my paintbrush tool. Shrink it down. Start getting rid of the influence that I do not need. Yeah, and this is how we do it. Now there is one really cool tool that's kind of tricky to use, but it's a good place to start. It's the gradient. So I know that everything from this bone up should be fading from dark blue up to red, including this branch here. So I could now, with the gradient tool, let's give it a shot, see what it does. Turn the weight to 1 and then try it. I'm just dragging my mouse down. I clicked at the top of my geometry up here, click and drag, and now it's painting the weight down the branches. Unfortunately, it's kind of sprays it out in all 3 dimensions, so it's coming up this branch as well. So then I have to go back to my paintbrush and change my size and then get in there. Oh, it's painting it the wrong color because red represents 1. So I'm going to undo that, drop my weight back to 0. Yeah, just paint that out. I might choose to hide my armature. And you can use that gradient tool with the weight set to 0 and bring it in like so. Yeah, see what it's doing up to the top of the tree if I go in at that angle. So I have to be looking at it in the appropriate way. Imagine you're sort of spraying in 3 dimensions the value of 0. Spraying it directly in 3D. Undo. So this stuff over here, I'm going to grab my smudge tool, try to smudge the blue out onto, the navy blue out onto these branches. So sped through the weight painting. It took me probably about 10 minutes, and it's far from perfect. I'll probably take another 20 minutes to clean stuff up, but I am going to go through each one of the bones now and just position them just to make sure that the geometry is deforming appropriately. So choose the skeleton, head on into pose mode, highlight each one of the bones, and just give it a rotate. You can see right away that's got problems. So that is influencing too much of the mesh. So I'd have to go back in for resetting the transform. Let's clear that transform. I'll go back into object mode, switch over to weight paint mode, and just clean that up. Paint out any of that. Control click on the bone. That's weight paints. Let's make sure I've got the right mode. Highlight the two. Weight paint. There we go. Yeah, these bones still need some cleanup. So yeah, you got to go back in, pose your stuff, look around, see how it's influencing the vertices, and then just tweak, tweak, tweak. Don't forget to highlight the armature when you need to see it, or hide it when you don't. Yeah, there we go. That's much better for that one particular bone. Yeah. So now I'm going to move on to animation. I've got a lot more work to do, cleaning up the weight paints, but I'm going to head on into animation now. So for this next step, I'm going to go over to layout mode, and down below, let's see where my mouse is. I'm just going to drag this up. This is going to show me my timeline down here. Now as an animator, they're handy later on when you've got broad brush animation strokes done. But what I prefer to see is what's referred to as the graph editor. You can change the view of each one of these windows with the little icon in the top left. The little clock right now that's set to the timeline mode. We can switch that on over to what I like is the graph editor. And this shows you much, much more detail regarding each and every one of the transforms that we're going to record using what are called keyframes. So I'm currently stuck out here on 210. I'm going to move my playhead. That's what this blue line is. I'm going to move that over to frame 1. You can always type it in here if you want to be very specific. I'm going to head over to frame 1, and with my armature selected, I'm going to switch on over to pose mode, and then I'm just going to make this rotate back and forth as though it's blowing in the wind. And these don't have to be big sweeping motions, and we don't necessarily have to just use the viewport either. Don't forget, you can always head up here into the transform area, and if you prefer to work with numbers like this, you can be very precise. Yeah, I think I'm just going to hold down, tap the R key, and just rotate that. And then I'm going to bake in a keyframe, and to do that you just type the I key. So we want to be specific. We could record everything. There's so much here to look at, but we're just animating the rotation. So let's record that one keyframe there. I'm going to go down the timeline a little bit to say frame 20. rotate, move it to the other side, tap the I key and insert another rotation keyframe. Go down to say 40. There's another way to create keyframes as well. Well, there's several ways. I just moved this over to here. We know that we're animating on all XYZ, so we can click and drag to select all three. Right click and insert keyframes. Now keep in mind, when you do this, it's going to create keyframes on all of the channels, including position. You gotta be kind of mindful of that. I prefer to just tap the I key and be very selective. Say I wanna make a keyframe on rotation, like so. And over time, what you'll start to see in your graph editor, you zoom down in, is these will start to take shape. These keyframes. And I'm just dragging this up and down like so. Yeah, and what we're seeing along the top index is our frames. That's when things are happening in time. And the value down the left-hand side is directly related to the value of the rotation here. Press play, see how this looks. Now, if I want to, I can grab these keys and I can tap the G key and move them down. I can move my keyframes around just like I'm moving vertices around. You can tap I, say I want to insert keyframes, all channels. I can grab those keys, G, drag them up, and I can do animation a lot quicker. Yeah. Move on to the next bone, do the same thing. Insert keyframe, R, let's rotate it first. Insert a keyframe. Head on down the timeline, rotate it a little bit more. I insert keyframes like so. G to move them up and down. Now we're animating in a way that gives us a lot more control. Yeah. I think I'm going to leave it at that for this tutorial. You hop back and forth between your layout and modeling view. I think what I'll do is go into pose mode, switch off my visibility of my armature, press play to see how that's looking. Fun. All right, everybody. Happy animating, and I will see you very soon.